The helicopter's rotors cut through the thick Afghan air like a knife through butter. Inside, Sarah Martinez pressed her back against the metal wall, her medical kit secured tightly between her boots. The other SEALs in her unit sat in their usual pre-mission silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. But Sarah's mind was racing with something different than combat strategy. She had been a Navy SEAL medic for 3 years now, one of only a handful of women who had made it through the grueling training. Every day, she proved herself worthy of the trident on her uniform. Every mission, she saved lives and earned the respect of the most elite warriors in the world. But, lately, something had been eating away at her confidence like acid on metal. The doubt had started small, during a routine training exercise 6 months ago. They were practicing emergency medical procedures in simulated combat conditions. Sarah had been treating a mock casualty when her instructor, Chief Petty Officer Roberts, stopped the exercise. "Martinez, what's your assessment?" he had barked. Sarah looked down at the training dummy, her hands still working to stop the simulated bleeding. "Gunshot wound to the abdomen, possible internal bleeding. Patient is conscious but showing signs of shock. I'm applying pressure to the entry wound and preparing for emergency surgery." Chief Roberts shook his head. "Wrong. Look again." Sarah examined the dummy more carefully. The wound looked exactly like what she had described. The vital signs on the monitor matched her assessment. She looked up at her instructor, confusion clear on her face. "The wound is too clean," Roberts said. "In real combat, you won't see textbook injuries like this. The enemy uses improvised explosives, fragments, dirty ammunition. This training is making you soft." At the time, Sarah had dismissed his criticism. She had real combat experience. She had treated actual wounded soldiers under fire. She knew what real injuries looked like. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Now, as the helicopter approached their target, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her training had failed to prepare her for something. She just couldn't figure out what. The mission was supposed to be straightforward. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a compound about 30 miles outside Kandahar. The target was believed to be planning an attack on a nearby American base. Sarah's team would fast rope into the compound, neutralize the threat, and extract any valuable intelligence. Lieutenant Commander Jake Wilson, their team leader, held up 5 fingers, then 4, then 3. The team prepared for insertion. Sarah checked her medical supplies one last time. Morphine, bandages, surgical tools, blood clotting agents. Everything she might need to keep her teammates alive. The helicopter hovered over the compound, and the team fast roped down into the darkness. Sarah hit the ground running, her rifle ready, her medical kit bouncing against her hip. The compound was larger than the intelligence reports had suggested. 3 buildings instead of 1, with a maze of walls and courtyards between them. The team moved with practiced precision, clearing each room systematically. Sarah stayed in the middle of the formation, ready to provide medical support if needed. They had cleared 2 buildings without incident when the shooting started. It came from everywhere at once. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks. Sarah dove for cover behind a low wall as bullets whistled over her head. She could hear her teammates calling out positions, coordinating their response to the ambush. Contact left. Multiple shooters in the 3rd building. "Martinez, we've got wounded." Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She low-crawled toward the voice that had called for her, keeping her head down as gunfire erupted around her. She found Petty Officer Davis behind a concrete barrier, clutching his shoulder. "How bad?" she asked, already pulling supplies from her kit. "Hurts like hell," Davis replied through gritted teeth. "But I can still fight." Sarah cut away his uniform sleeve to examine the wound. The bullet had passed through the muscle of his upper arm, missing the bone and major blood vessels. It was painful but not life-threatening. "You're lucky," she told him as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. "Through and through, no major damage. You'll be sore for a few weeks, but you'll live." She had just finished treating Davis when another voice called out. "Medic!"
We need you over here now.
Sarah grabbed her kit and sprinted across the courtyard, bullets snapping past her ears.
She found Sergeant Miller dragging Petty Officer Thompson behind a damaged vehicle. Thompson was unconscious, blood pooling beneath his body. Sarah immediately began her assessment.
Thompson had taken a round to the chest, just below his body armor. His breathing was labored, and his skin was pale and clammy.
Classic signs of internal bleeding and shock.
She worked quickly, cutting away his gear to get better access to the wound. The entry point was small and clean, but she knew that didn't mean much. The real damage was inside, where she couldn't see it.
Following her training, Sarah inserted in 4-line and began pushing fluids to combat the shock.
She applied a chest seal to the wound and prepared to call for emergency extraction. This was beyond what she could treat in the field. Thompson needed a surgeon, and he needed one fast. But, as she worked, something bothered her. The wound looked exactly like the training scenarios she had practiced hundreds of times.
Too clean. Too textbook. Chief Roberts' words echoed in her mind, "In real combat, you won't see textbook injuries like this."
Sarah pushed the thought away and focused on her patient.
Thompson's breathing was getting worse.
His blood pressure was dropping. She needed to get him stabilized for transport. "Wilson, we need immediate extraction," she called out to her team leader.
"Thompson's got internal bleeding. I can't treat this here."
"Negative," Wilson's voice crackled back over the radio. "We're still taking heavy fire.
Extraction bird can't land until we clear the area." Sarah looked down at Thompson. His lips were turning blue. His pulse was getting weaker.
By the book, he had maybe 10 minutes before he went into shock that she couldn't reverse. She had been trained for this exact scenario. Apply pressure, control bleeding, manage shock, and evacuate as soon as possible. But, looking at the wound, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not with Thompson, but with her approach. The gunfire around them was intense, but it had a strange rhythm to it.
The enemy fighters seemed to be firing in controlled bursts, not the wild spray she had experienced in other firefights. It was almost like they were following a script. Sarah had a crazy thought. What if this wasn't like her training scenarios at all? What if her training scenarios had been too much like real combat?
She looked at Thompson's wound again, really looked at it.
Small entry point, no exit wound visible.
If this was a typical combat injury, the bullet could have tumbled, fragmenting and causing massive internal damage.
But what if it hadn't?
Against everything she had been taught, Sarah decided to probe the wound. Using a small surgical instrument, she carefully explored the entry point. What she found made her blood run cold.
The bullet hadn't penetrated deeply at all.
It had been stopped by Thompson's equipment belt, which he wore under his body armor. The internal bleeding she was seeing wasn't from the gunshot wound.
It was from something else entirely.
Sarah quickly examined the rest of Thompson's body. She found what she was looking for on his back.
A small puncture wound, barely visible, right at the base of his neck.
Someone had stabbed him with something thin and sharp, probably a needle or small blade.
This wasn't a combat injury at all.
Someone on their team had tried to kill Thompson.
Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information.
If someone on her team was trying to kill Thompson, they would probably try to kill her too if they realized she had figured out what was really happening.
She had to think fast.
The team was still engaged in the firefight, which meant the traitor was probably still with them. She needed to keep Thompson alive and figure out who was trying to kill him without revealing that she knew what was really happening. Sarah made a decision that went against every piece of medical training she had ever received. Instead of treating Thompson for a gunshot wound, she began treating him for poisoning. She pushed drugs that would counteract whatever had been injected into his neck, praying that she was guessing correctly about what had been used.
Within minutes, Thompson's breathing began to improve.
His color started to return. He wasn't out of danger yet, but he was stable.
"How's he looking?"
Sergeant Miller asked, crawling over to check on them.
Sarah looked up at Miller.
He had been the one dragging Thompson when she arrived. He would have had the perfect opportunity to create the fake wound and inject Thompson with something.
Not good, she lied. I think the bullet nicked something important. He needs surgery immediately. Miller nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid of.
Poor bastard. But Sarah noticed that Miller didn't seem surprised or particularly upset. Most soldiers would be more emotional about a teammate being critically wounded.
Miller's reaction seemed almost satisfied.
The gunfire began to die down as Sarah's teammates gained control of the situation.
Lieutenant Commander Wilson's voice came over the radio.
All clear.
Extraction bird is inbound. How's Thompson?
Critical but stable, Sarah replied. We need to get him out of here fast. As they prepared to load Thompson onto the evacuation helicopter, Sarah made another disturbing discovery. Thompson's medical records, which she needed to give to the flight medic, had been altered. Someone had added information about allergies to medications that Sarah knew he didn't have. If she had followed the protocols and given Thompson the standard medications for his supposed gunshot wound, the fake allergies would have caused a fatal reaction. The person who had tried to kill Thompson had covered all the bases. Sarah realized that she was in serious danger. Someone on her team was a traitor, and they had just tried to commit murder. Worse, they had tried to use her medical training to complete the job. As the helicopter lifted off with Thompson aboard, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out who had tried to kill her teammate, even if it meant questioning everything she had been taught about being a SEAL medic. The flight back to base was tense. Sarah sat quietly, mentally reviewing everything that had happened during the mission. Someone on her team had tried to kill Thompson, and they had nearly succeeded. Only her decision to ignore her training had saved his life. But who was it? Miller was the obvious suspect, but Sarah couldn't rule out any of her teammates. Even Lieutenant Commander Wilson could be involved. The altered medical records meant that someone with access to classified systems was part of the plot. When they landed at the base, Sarah watched carefully as her teammates dispersed. Miller went straight to the debriefing room. Davis headed to the medical bay to have his arm properly treated. Wilson disappeared into the command center. Sarah knew she had to be careful. If the traitor realized that she had figured out what really happened to Thompson, her life would be in danger. She needed to investigate quietly, without raising suspicion. She started by visiting Thompson in the medical bay. He was conscious now, though still weak from whatever had been injected into him. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Thompson looked confused. "Okay, I guess. The doctors said you saved my life out there. Said if you hadn't acted so quickly, I would have bled out." Sarah realized that the medical staff had been told the same lie she had told Miller. They believed Thompson had been shot and that she had treated him for a gunshot wound. Only she knew the truth about what had really happened. "Thompson, I need to ask you something important," she said quietly. "Do you remember anything unusual about the mission? Anything that seemed off?" Thompson thought for a moment. "Not really. Everything seemed normal until the shooting started. Although..." He paused. "What?" "Miller seemed nervous before we inserted. More nervous than usual. And he kept asking me about my family, which he's never done before." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Miller's unusual behavior was another piece of evidence pointing toward him as the traitor. She left the medical bay and went to her quarters, locking the door behind her. She needed to think through her next steps carefully. She couldn't go to her commanding officers yet, not without more evidence. And she couldn't trust any of her teammates until she knew who was trying to kill them. Sarah opened her laptop and began researching. She looked up everything she could find about the mission they had just completed. The intelligence reports, the target information, the insertion plan. She was looking for anything that might explain why someone would want Thompson dead. What she found was disturbing. The intelligence about the high-value target was thin, almost non-existent. The compound they had raided was supposed to contain a terrorist planning an attack, but Sarah could find no evidence that such an attack was actually being planned. It was almost as if the entire mission had been designed to get Thompson into a situation where he could be killed. But why? What had Thompson done that made someone want him dead? Sarah was still researching when she heard a soft knock at her door. She froze, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. "Sarah? It's Davis. Can I come in?" Sarah hesitated. Davis had been wounded during the mission, which might make him less likely to be the traitor. But she couldn't be sure. "Just a minute," she called out, closing her laptop and hiding her research materials. She opened the door to find Davis standing in the hallway, his wounded arm in a sling. "How's the arm?" she asked. "It's fine. Listen, I wanted to thank you for patching me up out there. But that's not really why I'm here." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" Davis looked around nervously, then stepped into her room and closed the door behind him. "There's something you need to know about Thompson," he said quietly. "Something that could get us all killed if the wrong people find out." Sarah's hand remained close to her weapon as Davis spoke. She had learned not to trust anyone completely, not after what had happened to Thompson. But Davis seemed genuinely nervous, not threatening. "What do you know about Thompson?" she asked carefully. Davis sat down heavily on her chair, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded shoulder. 3 weeks ago, Thompson came to me with something that scared the hell out of him. He said he had discovered something about our unit, something that could destroy all of us." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. "What kind of something?" "He found out that some of our recent missions weren't what we thought they were. The targets we were hitting, the intelligence we were acting on, it was all fake. We've been used as assassins, Sarah. We've been killing innocent people." The room seemed to spin around Sarah as she processed this information. If Davis was telling the truth, it meant that their entire unit had been compromised. Worse, it meant that she had been part of murders disguised as military operations. "How did Thompson find this out?" she asked. Davis pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. "Thompson was always good with computers. Better than he let on. He started noticing inconsistencies in our mission briefings, so he did some digging. What he found is on here." Sarah took the flash drive, feeling its weight like a stone in her palm. "Why didn't he report this through proper channels?" "He tried," Davis said bitterly. "He went to Lieutenant Commander Wilson first. Wilson told him to keep quiet and let the investigation handle it. But the next day, Thompson found out that Wilson had deleted all the evidence from the secure servers. That's when Thompson realized that Wilson was part of it." Sarah's mind raced. If Wilson was involved, then the conspiracy went all the way to the top of their unit. No wonder Thompson had been targeted for elimination. "Who else knows about this?" she asked. "Just you and me now," Davis said. Thompson was planning to contact someone higher up the chain of command, but then last night's mission happened. Sarah realized that Davis didn't know the full truth about what had happened to Thompson. He thought Thompson had been wounded in combat like everyone else. She had to decide whether to trust him with what she had discovered. She made her choice. "Davis, I need to tell you something. Thompson wasn't shot by the enemy. Someone on our team tried to kill him." Davis stared at her in shock. "What are you talking about?" Sarah explained everything she had discovered during the mission. The fake gunshot wound, the injection site on Thompson's neck, the altered medical records. Davis listened in growing horror. "Jesus Christ," he whispered when she finished. "They tried to use you to kill him. If you had followed standard protocol, Thompson would be dead right now," Sarah finished. "And it would have looked like complications from his combat injury." Davis stood up and began pacing, his face pale. "This is bigger than we thought. If they're willing to kill Thompson to cover this up, they'll kill us too." Sarah plugged the flash drive into her laptop, hoping it might provide some answers. What she found made her stomach turn.
The files contained detailed records of 12 missions over the past 8 months. Missions that Sarah remembered well.
But, according to Thompson's research, every single target they had eliminated had been innocent. The terrorist bomb maker they had killed in Fallujah had actually been a local shopkeeper who had witnessed American soldiers selling weapons to insurgents. The Taliban commander they had eliminated near Kabul had been a village elder who was planning to testify about civilian casualties caused by American forces. Each mission had been carefully designed to look legitimate. The intelligence reports were professionally written and seemed credible. But Thompson had traced the sources back to their origins and found that most of the intelligence was fabricated. "My God," Sarah whispered as she scrolled through the files.
"We've been murder weapons.
Someone has been using us to eliminate witnesses and potential whistleblowers." Davis looked over her shoulder at the screen.
"Look at that last entry." Sarah clicked on the final file.
It contained information about their mission from the night before, but it had been written 3 days earlier. Someone had known exactly what was going to happen, including Thompson's planned death.
The file also contained a list of future targets.
Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the names.
3 of them were American soldiers stationed at other bases.
2 were journalists who had been investigating military contractor fraud. 1 was a member of Congress.
"They're planning to expand operations," Sarah said.
"This isn't just about covering up past crimes.
They're planning more murders." Davis grabbed her arm. "Sarah, we have to get this information out. We have to stop them." But Sarah was thinking about something else. "Davis, how did you know to come to me with this? Why didn't you go to someone else?" Davis hesitated for a moment before answering. "Thompson told me to trust you if something happened to him.
He said you were the only one on the team who asked questions about our missions. The only one who seemed uncomfortable with some of the targets we were hitting." Sarah remembered the conversations Thompson was referring to. After several missions, she had privately wondered about the intelligence quality. Some of the targets had seemed too easy to find, too isolated, too defenseless. But she had trusted her commanders and followed orders. "There's something else," Davis continued. "Thompson suspected that whoever is running this operation has people throughout the military medical system. They've been using medics like you to cover up murders that go wrong." Sarah felt sick as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. "How many other medics do you think are involved? Thompson thought most of them were innocent, like you. But he found evidence that at least 3 Navy medical officers were actively participating in the cover-ups." A soft knock at the door made both of them freeze. Sarah quickly ejected the flash drive and hid her laptop. "Sarah? It's Lieutenant Commander Wilson. I need to speak with you about Thompson's medical report." Sarah looked at Davis, terror clear in both of their eyes. If Wilson was part of the conspiracy, and he suspected that Sarah knew the truth about Thompson's injury, they were both in immediate danger. "Just a minute, sir," Sarah called out, trying to keep her voice steady. She motioned for Davis to hide in her bathroom, then opened the door to face her commanding officer. Wilson looked tired and stressed. His usual confident demeanor seemed forced. "How are you holding up after last night?" he asked. "Fine, sir. Just tired." Wilson nodded and stepped into her room, closing the door behind him. Sarah noticed that he positioned himself between her and the door, blocking her escape route. "I've been reviewing your medical report on Thompson," Wilson said. "There are some inconsistencies I need to clarify." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "You reported that Thompson had a gunshot wound to the chest with internal bleeding. But the surgical team at the hospital found something different." Sarah realized that the doctors who had treated Thompson must have discovered the truth about his injury. She had to decide quickly whether to continue lying or to take a massive risk and confront Wilson directly. "What did they find?" she asked. Wilson studied her face carefully. "They found evidence of poisoning. Someone had injected Thompson with a paralytic agent that nearly killed him. The gunshot wound was superficial, probably staged to cover up the real attack.
Sarah made a split-second decision. I know.
Wilson's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw his hand move slightly toward his sidearm.
You know what, exactly?
I know that someone on our team tried to kill Thompson. I know that our recent missions have been assassination operations disguised as counterterrorism.
And I know that you're involved.
For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, Wilson smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, he said. Thompson said you were the one person on the team who might figure things out. I should have listened to him. Sarah felt a chill as she realized what Wilson had just admitted. You killed him. You tried to kill Thompson. I didn't have a choice, Wilson said, his voice cold. Thompson was going to destroy an operation that has prevented dozens of terrorist attacks and saved hundreds of American lives. By murdering innocent people? Wilson's expression hardened. Those people weren't innocent. They were threats to American national security. Sometimes the traditional legal system moves too slowly to prevent attacks. Sometimes direct action is necessary. Sarah realized that Wilson actually believed what he was saying. In his mind, he was a patriot protecting America, not a murderer covering up crimes. The journalists you're planning to kill, Sarah said. How are they threats to national security? Wilson looked surprised that she knew about the future targets. You've been busy. Those journalists are working on stories that would expose classified counterterrorism operations. If their stories are published, dozens of ongoing operations would be compromised. American agents would be killed. Sarah saw the twisted logic in Wilson's reasoning, but she also saw the fundamental flaw. And who decides which operations are worth protecting? Who decides who lives and who dies? People with clearance levels you can't even imagine, Wilson replied. People who see the bigger picture. Sarah heard a slight sound from the bathroom where Davis was hiding. She hoped Wilson hadn't noticed it. What happens to me now? She asked, trying to keep Wilson's attention focused on her. That depends on you, Wilson said. You're a good medic, Sarah. One of the best I've ever worked with. You could be a valuable asset to this operation. Sarah felt sick at the suggestion. You want me to become a murderer. I want you to become a true patriot. To do what's necessary to protect American lives, even when it's difficult. Sarah realized that Wilson was offering her a choice. Join the conspiracy or die. But she also realized that he was making a mistake by not killing her immediately. He was giving her time to think, time to plan. I need time to consider this, she said. Wilson nodded. I understand. This is a big decision. Take tonight to think about it. But, Sarah. His voice turned threatening. Don't do anything foolish. Davis is already on our list of potential problems. It would be unfortunate if we had to move up his timeline. After Wilson left, Davis emerged from the bathroom, his face white with terror. Did you hear all that? Sarah asked. Enough. Jesus, Sarah, they're going to kill us both. Sarah was already moving, gathering her gear and the flash drive. Not if we get to them first. What are you talking about? We're going to expose this entire operation. But we can't do it from here. Wilson is probably watching us already, and he has resources we can't match. Sarah had made another decision that went against her training. Instead of working within the system, she was going to operate outside it. It was the only way to stay alive and stop the murders. Where can we go? Davis asked. Sarah thought for a moment. I know someone. A Marine intelligence officer stationed in Germany. She's not part of the Navy chain of command, and she owes me a favor from when I saved her life in Iraq. Can we trust her? She's the only person I can think of who has the clearance level to take this seriously and the independence to act on it. Sarah finished packing her gear, including Thompson's flash drive and her own copies of the evidence they had gathered.
How do we get out of here without Wilson knowing? Sarah smiled grimly. The same way we get into enemy territory without being detected. We use our training.
They waited until the early morning hours when the base was quiet. Sarah had studied the guard rotations and patrol schedules. She knew there was a 15-minute window when they could reach the motor pool undetected. Moving like the elite special operations soldiers they were, Sarah and Davis made their way across the base. They avoided the main roads and stayed in the shadows, using techniques they had learned for infiltrating enemy positions. At the motor pool, Sarah hotwired a Humvee while Davis kept watch. They had practiced this skill countless times, but never for the purpose of escaping from their own base.
Where exactly are we going? Davis asked as they drove away from the base. Kandahar Airport.
There's a cargo flight leaving for Ramstein Air Base in Germany at 0800. If we can get on that flight, we can reach my contact within 24 hours.
And if we can't? Sarah didn't answer, but they both knew the alternative.
Wilson and his conspirators would hunt them down and kill them, probably making it look like they had been killed by enemy action. As they drove through the Afghan countryside, Sarah thought about how completely her world had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been a trusted member of an elite military unit, confident in her training and proud of her service. Today, she was a fugitive from her own military, carrying evidence of a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the defense establishment. The sun was beginning to rise as they approached Kandahar Airport. Sarah could see the cargo planes lined up on the tarmac, including the one that would hopefully carry them to safety.
Sarah, Davis said quietly. What if this doesn't work? What if we can't expose the conspiracy?
Sarah checked her weapon and looked at the flash drive containing Thompson's research.
Then, we keep fighting until we do. Thompson risked his life to gather this evidence.
We owe it to him and to all the innocent people who have been killed to see this through. As they approached the airport perimeter, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. Military police vehicles were stationed at every entrance. Wilson had anticipated their escape route and set up a trap.
Shit, Davis whispered. They're waiting for us. Sarah made another split-second decision.
Instead of trying to enter the airport, she drove toward a different part of the perimeter where she had noticed a breach in the fence during previous visits.
What are you doing? We're going to approach this like a combat mission.
Wilson is thinking like a commander trying to catch deserters. But we're not deserters.
We're special operations soldiers behind enemy lines.
Sarah parked the Humvee about a mile from the airport and gathered her gear. From here, we go on foot. We infiltrate the airport, locate the cargo plane, and stow away.
Just like we would if this were enemy territory.
Davis looked skeptical, but he followed her lead. They moved carefully across the desert terrain, using natural cover to avoid detection. Sarah's medical training had not prepared her for operating like a fugitive, but her SEAL training had. It took them 2 hours to reach the airport perimeter undetected. Sarah found the fence breach she had remembered and carefully cut through the remaining wire.
Once inside the airport, they had to move even more carefully.
The place was crawling with military personnel, and any of them might be looking for 2 fugitive SEALs. Sarah used her knowledge of airport operations to navigate toward the cargo planes. She knew the loading schedules and the security protocols. More importantly, she knew how to hide in plain sight. They made it to the cargo plane that was bound for Germany just as the loading crew was finishing their work. Sarah waited for the right moment, then led Davis into the cargo hold while the crew was distracted. Finding hiding places among the cargo containers, they settled in for the long flight. Sarah clutched Thompson's flash drive tightly, knowing that it contained the only evidence that could stop the conspiracy. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Sarah allowed herself to feel a moment of relief. They had escaped Wilson's trap and were on their way to someone who might be able to help them. But she also knew that their real fight was just beginning. Wilson and his conspirators had resources and connections throughout the military establishment.
Exposing them would require more than just evidence.
It would require a level of courage and determination that would test everything Sarah had learned about being a warrior. The plane lifted off into the morning sky, carrying them away from Afghanistan and toward an uncertain future. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to rest, knowing that she would need all her strength for the battles ahead. The cargo plane landed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany after what felt like the longest flight of Sarah's life. Hidden among shipping containers, she and Davis had spent 18 hours cramped in uncomfortable positions, afraid to move too much in case they were discovered by the flight crew. When the plane finally touched down, Sarah felt relief mixed with terror. They had made it to Germany, but they were still fugitives. Wilson would have reported them as deserters by now, which meant military police at every base would be looking for them.
How do we get out of here without being caught?
Davis whispered as they heard the cargo doors opening.
Sarah had been thinking about this problem during the entire flight. We wait until they finish unloading, then we move fast.
I know where Major Patricia Chen works. If we can reach her office without being detected, she might be able to help us. They waited in their hiding places as the cargo crew worked around them.
Sarah could hear voices, the beeping of forklifts, and the general chaos of unloading a large transport plane. After what seemed like hours, the sounds gradually died away.
Sarah cautiously emerged from behind a container and looked around. The cargo hold was empty except for a few remaining boxes that would be unloaded later. She motioned for Davis to follow her toward the exit.
They made their way out of the plane and onto the tarmac.
Ramstein was a busy base, with aircraft taking off and landing constantly.
Sarah hoped they could blend in with the normal traffic of personnel moving around the facility.
The main challenge was getting from the flight line to the administrative buildings where Major Chen worked. They had to cross most of the base, and they had no authorization to be there.
"Follow my lead," Sarah told Davis.
"Walk like you belong here, and don't make eye contact with anyone." They started across the base, staying close to buildings and vehicles for cover when possible.
Sarah's plan was simple but risky.
If they acted like they were supposed to be there, most people wouldn't question their presence. The strategy worked for the first half mile. They passed several groups of airmen and soldiers without attracting attention. But, as they approached the administrative complex, Sarah spotted something that made her heart sink. Military police vehicles were stationed at every entrance to the building. Wilson had somehow anticipated their destination and alerted security at Ramstein to watch for them.
"There's no way we're getting through that," Davis said quietly. Sarah studied the building, looking for alternative entry points.
Her SEAL training had taught her to always have backup plans. "There," she said, pointing to a service entrance on the side of the building.
"Maintenance workers use that door. The security is probably lighter."
They circled around to the service entrance, but, as they approached, Sarah realized it was also being watched. A military policeman was stationed nearby, trying to look casual but clearly alert for anyone who didn't belong.
"We need a distraction," Sarah said.
She looked around and spotted a fire alarm pole station near the entrance.
"When I trigger this alarm, we have about 30 seconds before security realizes it's false. That should be enough time to get inside." Davis looked nervous.
"That's going to bring half the base here. Which is why we need to move fast once we're inside." Sarah approached the alarm casually, as if she were just walking past it. When the military policeman looked away for a moment, she pulled the alarm and immediately headed for the service door. The alarm's shrill sound filled the air, and Sarah could see confusion on the face of the guard as people began evacuating the building. In the chaos, she and Davis slipped through the service door unnoticed. They found themselves in a maintenance corridor that ran along the back of the building. Sarah had been to Ramstein before and had a general idea of the layout.
Major Chen's office was on the third floor, in the intelligence section. Moving quickly through the corridors, they avoided the main hallways where evacuating personnel were streaming toward the exits. Sarah used service stairs and back passages to make their way upward. When they reached the third floor, Sarah could see that most offices were empty due to the fire alarm. This was both good and bad. Good because they were less likely to encounter people who might recognize them as fugitives. Bad because Major Chen might not be in her office.
Sarah found the right office and tried the door. It was locked, but the lock was a standard military issue that she had learned to bypass during training. Within minutes, she had the door open. Major Patricia Chen was indeed in her office, apparently having ignored the fire alarm to continue working on classified materials. She looked up in surprise as Sarah and Davis entered.
Sarah Martinez? What the hell are you doing here?
Major Chen was a small, intense woman in her 40s. Sarah had saved her life 2 years earlier when Chen's convoy was ambushed in Iraq. Chen had taken shrapnel to the leg, and Sarah had kept her from bleeding out during the 2 hours it took for rescue to arrive.
Patricia, I need your help, Sarah said urgently.
We're in serious trouble, and we have information about a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of Special Operations Command.
Chen looked at Davis, then back at Sarah. Are you AWOL? Because if you are, I have to report your presence here immediately.
Yes, we're AWOL, Sarah admitted.
But not for the reasons you think.
Patricia, our entire unit has been compromised. We've been used as assassins to kill innocent people, and when one of our teammates tried to expose it, they tried to murder him.
Chen's expression grew serious. That's a very serious accusation. Do you have any proof?
Sarah pulled out Thompson's flash drive.
Everything is on here.
Mission reports, intelligence analyses, evidence that our targets were innocent civilians. Someone has been using SEAL teams to eliminate potential whistleblowers and witnesses. Chen took the flash drive and inserted it into her computer. As she began reading the files, her face grew pale.
Jesus Christ, she whispered. If this is real.
It's real, Davis said.
I've seen it firsthand.
We've been murdering innocent people for months. Chen continued reading, her expression growing more horrified with each file she opened.
Some of these names. I recognize some of these targets. I wrote intelligence reports on several of them myself.
Sarah felt a chill.
What kind of reports?
Assessments of their value as intelligence assets. These were people who could have provided crucial information about insurgent activities. According to my reports, they should have been cultivated as sources, not eliminated. Sarah realized the full scope of what had been happening. Someone has been taking your intelligence reports and using them to identify people who knew too much. Then, they sent us to kill them before they could talk. Chen stood up and began pacing.
This explains so much. I'd been wondering why so many of my recommended assets kept disappearing or turning up dead. I thought it was just bad luck or security leaks.
How high up does this go?
Davis asked. Chen thought for a moment.
Based on what I'm seeing here, it would have to involve people at the highest levels of Special Operations Command. This kind of operation would require access to classified intelligence, mission planning resources, and the ability to falsify orders. Sarah felt sick as the implications sank in.
How many other teams do you think are involved?
Could be dozens, Chen said grimly. If they figured out how to use special operations units for targeted assassinations, they could be operating globally. The fire alarm suddenly stopped, and Chen looked toward the door.
Security is going to be sweeping the building now to make sure it's clear. We don't have much time before they find us. What can we do? Sarah asked.
Chen was quiet for a long moment, obviously thinking through their options. I have contacts at the Pentagon who specialize in internal investigations. People who are outside the special operations chain of command.
But getting this information to them is going to be dangerous.
Why? Because if this conspiracy is as big as you think it is, they'll have people watching for anyone trying to expose them. The moment we start making official reports, they'll know about it. Sarah realized that Chen was right. Wilson and his conspirators would have anticipated that any survivors would try to report the conspiracy through official channels. They would be watching for exactly that kind of activity.
There has to be another way, Sarah said. Chen looked at the flash drive again. There might be.
I know a journalist who specializes in military investigations. Someone who has the resources and independence to investigate this without going through official channels.
Can we trust her?
More than we can trust anyone in the military right now, Chen replied.
But getting to her is going to be a problem.
She's based in Washington, and you two are probably on every watch list from here to the Pentagon.
Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor outside.
The security sweep was getting closer.
We need to leave, she said.
Chen quickly copied the files from Thompson's flash drive to her own secure storage.
I'll contact my journalist friend and see if she's willing to investigate this.
But you two need to disappear.
If Wilson's people find you, you're dead. Where can we go? Chen thought for a moment. I have a safe house in Berlin.
It's not official, just a place I use when I need to be off the grid.
You can hide there while I try to get this information to people who can act on it.
She wrote down an address and handed it to Sarah.
There's money hidden in the apartment, enough to last you a few weeks.
But stay off the grid. No phones, no internet, no contact with anyone. The footsteps in the corridor were getting closer.
Sarah could hear security personnel checking offices. How will you contact us?
Davis asked.
I won't.
If this works, you'll know because the story will break in the news.
If it doesn't work. Chen didn't finish the sentence. Sarah understood.
If Chen's plan failed, she and Davis would be on their own, hunted by their own military and marked for death by a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of government.
Patricia, Sarah said as they prepared to leave. Thank you for trusting us. Chen smiled grimly. You saved my life once. Now I'm returning the favor.
Sarah and Davis left Chen's office through a window that led to a fire escape. They made their way down the outside of the building and disappeared into the German countryside.
The safe house in Berlin was a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood where two Americans wouldn't attract much attention.
Chen had stocked it with basic supplies and enough cash to last several weeks. For the next few days, Sarah and Davis lived like ghosts. They ventured out only for food and supplies, always staying alert for any sign that they had been discovered. Sarah found herself questioning everything she had believed about the military and her own service.
Davis was struggling even more.
I keep thinking about all those missions, he said one evening. All those people we killed. They were innocent, and we murdered them. We didn't know, Sarah replied, though the words felt hollow even to her.
Does that matter?
We're still responsible for their deaths.
Sarah didn't have a good answer for that.
The guilt was eating away at both of them, but she knew they had to stay focused on stopping the conspiracy before more innocent people died. On their fifth day in Berlin, Sarah was returning from a supply run when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A black sedan was parked across from their apartment building, and the men inside were obviously watching the building. Wilson had found them.
Sarah didn't go back to the apartment.
Instead, she found a payphone and called the apartment from several blocks away. Davis, get out now, she said when he answered.
They've found us. Are you sure?
Positive.
There's surveillance outside. Take only what you need and leave through the back exit. Meet me at the backup location we discussed.
Sarah had insisted on having multiple escape plans, a lesson learned from her SEAL training. They had identified several potential meeting points in case their safe house was compromised.
She made her way to the backup location, a small cafe in a different part of the city.
Davis arrived 20 minutes later, looking shaken. How did they find us so fast? He asked.
Sarah had been thinking about that. Either they traced us through Chen, or they have resources we didn't know about. What do we do now?
Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number.
The message contained only a link to a news website. Sarah's hands shook as she clicked the link.
The headline made her heart race. Pentagon investigation uncovers assassination conspiracy within Special Operations Command. The article, written by investigative journalist Rebecca Walsh, detailed exactly what Sarah and Davis had discovered. The conspiracy to use SEAL teams for targeted assassinations, the falsified intelligence reports, the murdered innocents.
Everything was there.
Chen did it, Davis whispered.
She got the story out.
But Sarah was reading further into the article, and what she found made her realize their fight was far from over. According to the article, the Pentagon had launched a full investigation, but many of the key conspirators had disappeared. Wilson was among those who had vanished, along with several other high-ranking officers. Worse, the article mentioned that 2 SEAL medics were wanted for questioning in connection with the conspiracy.
Their names were Sarah Martinez and James Davis.
"We're not safe yet," Sarah said grimly. "Wilson is still out there, and now we're wanted by both sides." As if summoned by her words, Sarah's phone rang.
The caller ID showed an unknown international number. "Don't answer it," Davis said. But Sarah had a feeling she knew who was calling. She answered the phone.
"Hello, Sarah." It was Wilson's voice, calm and cold.
"Where are you?" Sarah asked.
"Somewhere safe.
Somewhere your Pentagon friends can't reach me. But I wanted you to know that this isn't over. The story is out there. Everyone knows what you did."
Wilson laughed. "The story is out there, but the proof is gone. Amazing how evidence can disappear when you know the right people." Sarah felt her heart sink.
"What do you mean?"
"I mean that Thompson's files, Chen's copies, everything you think you have as evidence has been destroyed or discredited. The Pentagon investigation will find some low-level scapegoats and close the case.
The real operation will continue." Sarah realized that Wilson was probably right.
The conspiracy was too big and too well connected to be stopped by a single news article. "But you and Davis are a different problem," Wilson continued. "You know too much, and you're too stubborn to accept a reasonable solution."
"What kind of solution?" "The same one I offered before. Join us, or die."
Sarah looked at Davis, who was listening to the conversation with growing alarm.
"And if we refuse?" she asked.
"Then, we'll hunt you down, wherever you go.
We have resources you can't imagine and patience you can't outlast. Eventually, we'll find you."
The line went dead, leaving Sarah and Davis alone in the crowded cafe, surrounded by people but feeling completely isolated.
"What now?" Davis asked. Sarah thought about their options. They could run, try to disappear, and hope Wilson's people never found them.
They could surrender to the Pentagon and hope the investigation would protect them. Or they could fight back. She made her decision. "Now we stop running and start fighting back."
"How?"
Sarah looked at the news article on her phone, then at Davis.
"Wilson thinks he's destroyed all the evidence.
But he's wrong.
We're the evidence. We're witnesses to everything that happened. He'll kill us before we can testify. Not if we're smart about it. And not if we get help from the right people."
Sarah was forming a plan, one that would require everything she had learned as a SEAL and everything she had discovered about the conspiracy.
"Wilson made one mistake," she said.
"He told us too much. Now we know how he thinks, how his organization works.
We can use that against him."
Davis looked skeptical, but Sarah could see hope beginning to return to his eyes.
"What did you have in mind?"
Sarah's plan was dangerous and complicated, but it was their only chance to stop Wilson and his conspiracy once and for all. She had realized that trying to work within the system would never succeed.
Wilson had too many allies and too much influence.
Instead, they would have to expose the conspiracy in a way that made it impossible to cover up or ignore.
"We're going to force Wilson to reveal himself," Sarah explained to Davis as they sat in the Berlin cafe. "He thinks he's won because the official evidence has been destroyed. But there's one thing he can't destroy."
"What's that?"
"His own arrogance. Wilson believes he's too smart to be caught. We're going to use that against him." Sarah had been thinking about Wilson's psychology during their phone conversation.
He was a man who needed to be in control, who couldn't resist showing off his superior knowledge and resources. That pride would be his downfall.
How do we get him to reveal himself? We make him think he's winning. We set up a trap that he can't resist walking into. The plan Sarah outlined was risky for both of them.
They would split up and use themselves as bait to draw Wilson and his people into the open. But they would do it in a very public way, with multiple witnesses and recording devices, making it impossible for Wilson to eliminate them quietly. Rebecca Walsh, the journalist who wrote the article, is still investigating the story, Sarah said. According to her latest reports, she's planning to do a follow-up piece about the two missing SEAL medics.
Us. Davis understood immediately. You want to give her an exclusive interview. More than that.
I want to give her a live interview, broadcast on national television, with Wilson's people trying to stop us. The whole world will see them trying to silence witnesses to their crimes.
It was an audacious plan that required perfect timing and a lot of luck.
But Sarah believed it was their only chance to survive and stop the conspiracy.
They spent the next 3 days preparing.
Sarah contacted Rebecca Walsh through an encrypted messaging system and arranged to meet her in Paris. Walsh was skeptical at first, but when Sarah provided details that hadn't been published in the news, the journalist agreed to the interview. Davis would travel separately to Paris, taking a different route and using different identification. They would meet at the television studio where Walsh had arranged for the live interview to be broadcast.
Sarah's journey to Paris was tense.
She kept watching for any sign that Wilson's people had found her trail. She traveled by train, using false identification that Major Chen had provided, and changed trains several times to make tracking more difficult. She arrived in Paris the day before the scheduled interview and checked into a small hotel in the Latin Quarter. That night, she barely slept, going over the plan repeatedly and preparing for what she would say during the interview.
The next morning, Sarah received a text message from Davis. In position.
Ready to proceed. She took a deep breath and headed for the television studio. The interview was scheduled for 2 p.m. local time, which would make it morning viewing in the United States. Walsh had arranged for the story to be broadcast live on a major news network. Sarah arrived at the studio an hour early and was met by Rebecca Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had built her reputation investigating government corruption.
Are you sure you want to do this? Walsh asked as they prepared for the interview. Once we go live, there's no going back.
I'm sure, Sarah replied.
Too many innocent people have died already.
If I don't speak up, more will die.
Davis arrived at the studio 30 minutes before the interview.
Sarah was relieved to see him, but she could tell he was as nervous as she was. Any sign that Wilson's people are here? She asked.
Not yet. But they will be. At exactly 2 p.m., the interview began.
Sarah and Davis sat across from Rebecca Walsh in a professional television studio, with cameras rolling and millions of viewers watching around the world. Walsh started with basic questions about their background and their service in Afghanistan. Then, she moved into the details of the conspiracy. You're alleging that members of the U.S. military were using special operations teams to assassinate innocent civilians, Walsh said. That's an extremely serious accusation.
It's not an allegation, Sarah replied firmly. It's the truth.
I have first-hand knowledge of at least 12 missions where we were ordered to eliminate targets who posed no threat to American security. Sarah went on to describe the missions in detail, providing specific dates, locations, and target information. She explained how the intelligence reports had been falsified and how the medical system had been used to cover up murders. Davis corroborated her account, adding his own observations about the suspicious nature of their missions and the attempts to silence Thompson.
15 minutes into the interview, Sarah saw what she had been waiting for. Through the studio windows, she could see black SUVs pulling up outside the building. Men in dark suits were getting out and heading for the entrance.
They're here, she said quietly to Walsh. Walsh had been expecting this. She turned to the camera. It appears that individuals are attempting to interrupt this interview.
We are going to continue broadcasting live as events unfold.
The studio doors burst open, and armed men in tactical gear stormed in. But, instead of immediately attacking Sarah and Davis, they hesitated when they saw the cameras still rolling and the interview being broadcast live to millions of viewers. "Turn off those cameras," one of the men commanded. "This is a live news broadcast," Walsh replied calmly.
"We have every right to continue."
Sarah saw Wilson enter the studio behind his men. He looked furious but was trying to maintain his composure in front of the cameras. "Sarah Martinez and James Davis are wanted fugitives," Wilson announced.
"They are under arrest for desertion and treason." "Under whose authority?" Walsh demanded. Wilson held up official-looking documents.
"Under the authority of the Department of Defense and the National Security Agency."
But Sarah had been counting on this moment.
"Tell the viewers your name," she called out to Wilson.
"Tell them who you are and what unit you command." Wilson realized his mistake.
By appearing on camera to arrest them, he had revealed himself as part of the conspiracy. The entire world could see that he was personally involved in trying to silence witnesses to war crimes.
"Lieutenant Commander Wilson," Walsh said, addressing him directly. "These witnesses have just provided detailed testimony about a conspiracy within Special Operations Command. Would you care to respond to their allegations?"
Wilson's face went red with anger. "These people are traitors and liars.
Everything they've said is fabricated." "Then, why not let them have their day in court?" Walsh pressed. "Why the dramatic arrest during a live television interview?"
Sarah could see that Wilson was losing control of the situation. His plan to quietly eliminate two troublesome witnesses had turned into a public relations disaster broadcast live around the world.
"The interview is over," Wilson declared. "These fugitives are coming with us."
But, as his men moved toward Sarah and Davis, something unexpected happened.
Police sirens could be heard outside, and French police officers began entering the studio. Rebecca Walsh smiled at Wilson. "I should mention that this interview is taking place in France, not the United States.
These officers are here to ensure that French law is followed." The lead French police officer spoke to Wilson in accented English. "Monsieur, you have no authority to make arrests on French soil. If you wish to extradite these individuals, you must go through proper diplomatic channels."
Wilson was trapped.
He couldn't arrest Sarah and Davis without causing an international incident that would be broadcast live on television.
But he also couldn't let them continue their testimony. Sarah seized the moment. "Lieutenant Commander Wilson, you said our testimony is fabricated. Then, explain how we knew details about classified missions that were never made public.
Explain how we knew the names of the innocent people your unit murdered."
Wilson's composure finally cracked. Those people weren't innocent.
They were threats to American security. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made to protect American lives. The confession was broadcast live to millions of viewers. Wilson had just admitted on international television that he had ordered the murders of innocent civilians.
Walsh turned back to the camera. "You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
A U.S. military officer has just confessed on live television to ordering the assassination of innocent civilians." Wilson realized what he had done. In his anger and frustration, he had provided the very evidence that Sarah and Davis had been unable to preserve.
His own words, broadcast live and recorded, were now evidence of the conspiracy.
"This interview is over," he said again, but his voice had lost its authority.
The French police officer stepped forward.
"Actually, monsieur, I believe we need to discuss this matter further. These allegations of war crimes are very serious." Sarah watched as Wilson's carefully constructed conspiracy began to crumble in real time. His own arrogance and need for control had led him to reveal himself and his crimes on live television. Over the next few hours, the story exploded across the international news. Wilson's confession was played repeatedly, and government officials in Washington were forced to respond to questions about war crimes committed by American Special Operations Forces. The French government announced that they would be investigating the allegations and considering whether to file charges against Wilson and his associates. Other European nations began their own investigations, putting pressure on the U.S. government to take action. Within 48 hours, the Pentagon announced a full investigation into the allegations, this time led by officials from outside the Special Operations Command structure.
Several high-ranking officers were suspended pending the outcome of the investigation.
Wilson and several of his associates were arrested by French authorities and held pending possible extradition to the United States. Without Wilson's protection, other members of the conspiracy began coming forward with their own testimony, hoping to avoid prosecution. Sarah and Davis were granted protective custody by the French government while the investigations proceeded. They spent the next several months providing testimony to military investigators, congressional committees, and international war crimes tribunals. Thompson, who had recovered from his poisoning, also provided crucial testimony about the conspiracy. His computer skills proved valuable in reconstructing the digital evidence that Wilson had tried to destroy. The final investigation report, published 8 months later, confirmed everything that Sarah and Davis had alleged. The conspiracy had involved over 50 military personnel and had resulted in the murders of at least 30 innocent civilians across multiple countries. Wilson was eventually extradited to the United States, where he was court-martialed and sentenced to life in prison for war crimes and conspiracy to commit murder. Several other officers received long prison sentences, while lower-ranking personnel who had been unwitting participants received lesser punishments. For Sarah, the victory felt hollow. The conspiracy had been exposed and the perpetrators punished, but the innocent people who had died could not be brought back.
The families who had lost loved ones would never see justice in the truest sense.
But she also knew that her decision to question her training and trust her instincts had saved lives. If she had followed standard medical protocols and not investigated Thompson's injury, the conspiracy would never have been exposed.
More innocent people would have died. Sarah was offered the opportunity to return to the Navy with full honors and a promotion.
Instead, she chose to leave the military and work with international organizations investigating war crimes. Davis made the same choice, feeling that he could better serve justice outside the military structure. Years later, Sarah would look back on those terrifying weeks in Afghanistan, Germany, and France as the most important of her life. She had learned that sometimes the greatest courage is required not in following orders, but in questioning them. She had also learned that the medical oath to first do no harm sometimes required more than just treating injuries. Sometimes it required exposing the people who caused those injuries in the first place. The experience had changed her understanding of what it meant to be a warrior and a healer. True strength, she realized, sometimes meant admitting that you didn't have all the answers and being willing to question everything you thought you knew. In her new work with international human rights organizations, Sarah applied the same questioning approach that had helped her uncover the conspiracy. She investigated military medical practices around the world, looking for patterns that might indicate cover-ups of war crimes. She never forgot Thompson's courage in gathering the initial evidence, or Major Chen's willingness to risk her career to help expose the truth. Most of all, she never forgot the innocent people who had died because she and others had followed orders without questioning whether those orders were moral or legal. The story of the SEAL medic who questioned her training became a case study in military academies and medical schools around the world. It was used to teach future officers and medical personnel about the importance of moral courage and the responsibility to speak up when they witnessed wrongdoing. Sarah occasionally gave lectures about her experience, always emphasizing the same message, that professional training and military discipline are important, but they should never replace individual moral judgment. Sometimes the most important skill a person can have is the ability to recognize when their training is inadequate or when they are being asked to participate in something wrong. She also emphasized that exposing wrongdoing often requires tremendous personal sacrifice. She and Davis had lost their military careers, their security clearances, and their old identities. They had lived as fugitives for months and had faced the possibility of death or imprisonment. But they had also prevented more innocent deaths and brought justice to the families of those who had been murdered. In the end, Sarah believed that was worth any personal cost. The conspiracy Wilson had led was eventually traced back to a small group of officers who had convinced themselves that they were protecting America by eliminating potential threats before those threats could materialize. They had created their own definition of patriotism and used it to justify murder. Sarah understood how easy it would have been to fall into the same trap. The desire to protect America and save American lives was genuine and powerful. But she had learned that true patriotism sometimes required standing up against one's own government when that government was wrong. Years after the conspiracy was exposed, Sarah was contacted by families of some of the innocent people who had been killed. Many of them thanked her for bringing the truth to light, even though it couldn't bring their loved ones back. One mother, whose son had been killed in Iraq because he had witnessed American soldiers selling weapons to insurgents, told Sarah that knowing the truth had finally allowed her to grieve properly. For years, she had believed her son had been killed by terrorists. Learning that he had actually been murdered for trying to do the right thing had been painful, but it had also made her proud of him. These conversations reminded Sarah why she had made the choices she had. The truth was often painful, but it was always necessary. Without truth, there could be no justice, no healing, and no prevention of future atrocities. Sarah's story became a reminder that individual courage can make a difference, even against seemingly impossible odds. One person's willingness to question authority and seek the truth had exposed a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of military command. But it also served as a warning about how easy it is for good people to become complicit in evil when they stop asking questions and simply follow orders. The same training and discipline that made special operations forces so effective could also make them vulnerable to manipulation by those with hidden agendas. In the end, Sarah's most important discovery was not about the conspiracy itself, but about the responsibility that comes with knowledge and training. Whether someone is a soldier, a doctor, or any other kind of professional, they have an obligation to ensure that their skills are used for the right purposes. That obligation sometimes requires questioning authority, challenging the system, and risking everything to do what is right. It is never easy, and it often comes at great personal cost. But it is the price of maintaining one's integrity and humanity in a complex and often morally ambiguous world. Sarah Martinez had learned this lesson in the mountains of Afghanistan, when she chose to trust her instincts over her training and discovered that her teammate had been poisoned rather than shot. That single decision had started a chain of events that ultimately brought down a criminal conspiracy and saved countless innocent lives. It had also taught her that sometimes the most important battles are not fought against foreign enemies, but against corruption and moral compromise within one's own ranks. And sometimes the most heroic thing a person can do is simply refuse to be silent when they witness something wrong, regardless of the consequences.